Fantastic. Good morning, class. I have a, if I went by just who's sitting in the chairs, I have a class of one today. Two if you count the AV booth, because he's kind of hostage. But they're coming in. They're here. They're just not sitting in the chairs. Hey, Glenn, while we're streaming today, would you just keep an eye on the overall volume on the streaming computer? That little green bar jumping up and down. Hopefully I'm going to be a lot louder for the folks at home, but if I'm clipping or sounding ugly, that's not good. So just keep an eye on that for me. Welcome to our study of the book of Revelation. I am excited to be here with you today. We've reached the beginning of the end. Maybe. It's not the end of the beginning, because there's a beginning after the end. If you need, there's coffee back there if you need it. All right, so we are studying Revelation, and as we usually do, I'm going to try and give you a little recap, a little run through. And if you wonder why that is, one, I know not everything I say sticks the first time I say it. You know, maybe not the fifth time I say it. So some repetition helps reinforce for you all, but also, you know, if anybody's going to join this class, I don't expect they're going to go back and necessarily listen to several months' worth of backlog Bible studies. Good on them if they do. At least I think so. But, you know, I don't want anybody walking in feeling like they're just completely lost. Right? So let's go through a little bit of study of, a little review of our book of Revelation here. Book of Revelation was given to whom? To whom are these things being revealed? John the Baptist? Elder. John the Elder. Good for you, man. Yeah. We think it's probably John the Apostle, right? Also known as John the Elder. What was the other nickname that I mentioned to you previously in the class? Well, yeah. The disciple that Jesus loved. Also John the Theologian. That's how he was known in the early church, you may remember as well. The book of Revelation, what genre does it fall into? Science fiction? Feels like it sometimes, but no, this is factual. It's just not literal in the way we expect it to be. I heard over here, what's the genre? Prophecy, prophetic vision in particular. Prophecy actually comes in a few different flavors. There are what I would call a direct oracle, and then there are visions. Those tend to be the two most common versions of prophecy. So a direct oracle, I'm just coining that term as far as I know. It's fine, but I just have to give it a label so you know what we're talking about. Would be something like God says to Jonah, go tell Nineveh 40 days, yet Nineveh overturned. Right? So if Jonah goes and delivers that message, that is prophecy. There was no vision as a part of that. God gave him some words. He spoke those words. And that is how God operates quite a lot of the time, actually. When you read through the prophetic books of the Old Testament. Yeah, write this down. A lot of it is this sort of direct oracle, right? God gives, let's say Isaiah, a verbatim message, and then he goes and delivers it. But we do have precedent as well for other prophetic vision in Scripture. Off the top of your head, can you name any from the Old Testament, prophetic visions? Don't just stare at me waiting for me to give you the answer. Y'all know. Come on. Some prophetic visions from the Old Testament. Mike, they think if they wait long enough, I'll just answer. Isaiah, okay. How about Joseph? Do y'all remember the story of Joseph? In the Old Testament. Remember Coat of Many Colors, Joseph? That guy? Yeah. How did his brothers feel about him? Okay, I know what we're studying next. Great. Outstanding. We're going to do some Genesis next. All right, so Joseph, they, well, loved is strong. Joseph had these visions of stars bowing down to him or sheaves of wheat bowing down to him, and they were a prophetic vision of how one day his older brothers would come and bow before him. As you can imagine, when little brother, who is, by the way, Dad's favorite, is saying things like that to his 11 older brothers, they might not be into it, you know? And so they were gonna kill him, but Judah and Reuben intervened and said, you know what, let's not do that. That's a little too much. Let's fake his death, and then they sold him into slavery. Right? That's how he winds up eventually in Egypt. And there in Egypt, he's in prison again. He's accused of some misconduct by a high official's wife. So he winds up in prison. He didn't do it, but wrongfully incarcerated. And there in prison, there's a baker and a cupbearer. And they have these dreams, and Joseph interprets them. And then later Pharaoh has dreams, and Joseph interprets them. Joseph winds up the prime minister. That's not the term they use, but that's what it is. He winds up as the prime minister of Egypt. And then when the famine comes, guess what? His older brothers come, and they buy the grain that was stored up because of the visions that Joseph had. And they are bowing at his feet. But it's a reconciliation time, and it's beautiful. And by the way, this is also how eventually the people of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, those are the 12 brothers we're talking about. This is how they wind up in Egypt and eventually enslaved in Egypt, which leads to the Exodus. Why are you looking at me like that? All right, we'll cover that stuff next. So Joseph's an example of prophetic vision. Another one would be Daniel, right? We studied Daniel not that long ago. I thought that would be the easy answer for you. Daniel has some visions of his own. He also interprets some of the visions of the King Nebuchadnezzar. And through reading those stories and seeing how, in narrative form, those prophets encounter visions and how they interpret visions, gives us some keys into how we ought to interpret visions as well. So here we have John, and he is visited by Jesus, and it's very symbolic. As we get into prophetic vision, we should expect that the characters that appear are symbolic, generally speaking, right? So when we read about a lamb opening seals of a scroll, this isn't just some random fuzzy animal, right? That lamb actually represents whom? Jesus. Okay? So characters, we should assume, are metaphorical at some level. The settings, right? So we're sitting on a throne, and that looks like it's made out of precious stones, and there's like a halo of emerald around. There's a sea underneath him, right? Well, those all have symbolic quality to them. Characters, settings, actions typically will have some sort of a, some symbolic significance, and adjectives, right? Like what does green mean here? Why is it the color of blood? Why, if things are red, why are they red? And also numbers, right? We understand that numbers are symbolic in this book as well. And that matters a lot when we read about, let's say, the mark of the beast. It's a number. Is it a literal number? If you buy a cup of coffee and it costs $6.66, should you not drink it? Give them a tip and then you're fine, right? But that's, we can get kind of superstitious about that sort of stuff, but that number, 666, has a symbolic quality to it. 7 has a symbolic quality to it. 3, 4, 10, 12, 3.5. We've talked about some of those numbers before. We're going to hit 144,000 again in our reading today. So we saw that earlier. We're going to see it again. It's probably a smart idea to not fix in your mind that that represents literally an exact number of human souls. It's not an exact number of human souls. It's a representative number that means something. And if you try and make it an exact number, you're actually probably reducing the significance of the number, right? Why is all of this stuff symbolic? Why is it all metaphor? Why is it all encoded? Why can't he just say it plainly? Okay, so in part, it's because the message is too big to communicate that way, right? All right, just by show of hands, are any of y'all math nerds? Okay, I got 2. Okay. With a pencil, can you draw a one-dimensional figure? Line segment, right? Can you draw a two-dimensional figure? We'll make a square. Great. Can you draw a three-dimensional figure? Well, not really. You can give an illusion of it being three-dimensional, right? You do a square here, a square there, use your diagonal lines to connect it. It gives it an appearance of depth. It's not true depth, right? Or if you're a math nerd, you might make a net out of that, right? So you get like basically a cross shaped out of squares, and if you folded it all up, then you could have a cube. With some Legos, you can make a cube, right? That's three-dimensional. Can you make a four-dimensional object? No, but you could represent it. You could make a net of it, right? Have any of y'all seen that Salvador Dali painting of Christ over the world? He's like out in space being crucified, basically, and the cross that he's on isn't like a regular cross. It looks like a cube, but it's got things going out in various directions. So I've lost the math geeks and the art geeks. All right. So the idea there is it's a net of a four-dimensional cube. It's a way of representing what a four-dimensional cube would be, but you know, the poor guy's doing it in 2 dimensions. Good on you, Salvador Dali. So the point is, we can represent a concept, but we can't actually communicate that whole thing, and you have to do a little bit of inference and interpretation to get from, you know, it's a cube on a piece of paper. It's not really a cube, right? We have to kind of reduce it in some ways to fit the medium. What John is perceiving is what's happening spiritually, and I mean that. But what I don't mean by that is just angels, right? I mean, there are spiritual forces. There are movements throughout history. There are ideas that take hold of people, right? People are also spiritual beings. You are a spiritual being, right? You have a physical body, but you also have a spirit. And as from the heaven perspective looking down, when you're working from eternity, you're going to see patterns, right? You're going to see things in history happen again and again and again. Yeah? And so oftentimes I think part of the reason it's representational is because depending on where you are in history, you might have different actors playing the parts. Does that make sense? All right, so we got our math people, we got our art people, we got our theater people. Who else do I got to hit today? Sports people, maybe? I don't know. We'll get there in the sermon, probably. All right, so yeah, it's a transcendent message. John probably can't understand it all. It also represents things that are moving, not necessarily. We like to have things presented in a very linear way. Story starts at the beginning, you go through the middle in order, mostly, and then when you get to the end and it's over, this story's not really told like that. It's told in loops, spirals, sort of. Sometimes you get overlapping events. The world's going to end a few different times throughout this book. That doesn't mean we should anticipate historically multiple ends of the world. Just we're seeing it from different perspectives. Much like in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the world gets created twice. The world didn't get created twice. The story got told twice with two different foci, right? First, focusing sort of broadly on God making the entire material world. The second time the story is told, it's a focus more directly upon God and man and woman, right? God and mankind. All right. That's probably enough primer on how to read the book. Should probably hit this earlier in the book. So as the book opens, it starts actually with praise. We see the four living creatures gathered around the throne, praising God. There are the elders, 24 elders up in heaven, gathered around the throne. They're praising God. There are saints under the altar early on, and they are anxiously awaiting God finishing the work that he's begun. So, you can tell even though things are good, things aren't finished. And they're not as good as they're going to be. We encountered the 144,000 before, and when John first saw them, one of those elders approached John and said, "Do you know who these people are?" And John's like, "Oh, you know, right?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, these are they who have made it out of the Great Tribulation. They've washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb." So a good way of understanding who are these 144,000, they are the people who ran the race, fought the good fight of faith. They reached the end of their lives on earth and are kept safe with God in heaven, right? Redeemed and blessed by him. We would say, maybe these are, we could say this is the church triumphant, to use some Lutheran language, right? They're not those who are contending today. They're those who have crossed the finish line of their earthly life. So that'll matter, because we're going to come back to them here in a little bit. There's some other salient things we want to talk about. We've talked about 7 seals, and each of those sort of seems to be progressing us toward the end. We had these 7 trumpets, and each of them seem to be progressing us toward the end. And along with each of those, there were all sorts of hardships and fearful things, right? The world cracking apart, the water becoming foul, the hail falling from the sky, fire, all kinds of stuff, man. And even the forces of hell, as we would normally say it. The word used here is the abyss, right? The abyss opens up and demons pour out to make life miserable for everybody, but in particular on the Christians. So we get through all of that struggle, and we know there's triumph at the end. And then there's a shift. And now John is seeing a vision of a pregnant woman and a dragon, and the dragon wants to eat the baby that she's going to give birth to, but he's not allowed to. The dragon, we're told, is Satan. If we're just told that straight up, so thank you. That's handy. Don't have to confuse that. He is unable to stop that baby from being born or to devour it when it is born, and it is eventually taken off to safety in heaven. The dragon, frustrated that he can't get that child, turns his attention to the earth, to the people there. And he's trapped there, right? He's been cast down and is stuck there. He calls from the sea, the first beast, and that beast resembles him. Multiple heads, multiple horns, 7 heads, 10 horns, a bunch of crowns. And the first beast that comes out of the sea is like a leopard, bear, lion hybrid with these multiple heads. And the dragon gives him authority to do things, and the people worship that beast. And I suggested to you that perhaps in this case, the sea is a representation of chaos and disorder. And so this beast rising out of it is promising to bring order and stability, right? It probably represents some sort of secular authority, right? Worldly government kind of stuff, possibly. I wouldn't limit it strictly to how you think about government as like the lawmaking, yada, 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 but just think, worldly authority. There's a second beast that's summoned up out of the land. It resembles a lamb, but when it speaks with the voice of dragon, right? And what does that mean? Well, we know if the dragon is the devil and the devil is the snake, right? The dragon who has lost his wings, so to speak, and has to crawl in his belly and eat dirt. You know the story from Genesis 1, I hope, but we're going to do Genesis soon, so you'll get to revisit it again. So when he speaks to Eve, what kind of words does he use? Deceitful, that's right. Not necessarily lies in the sense of saying falsehoods, but definitely lies in the sense of saying things that are misleading. Well, did God really say? In the day that you eat it, you won't die, you'll be like him, knowing good and evil. Adam and Eve didn't understand death. And in one sense, they didn't die that day. But in another sense, yes, everything died that day, right? So if this second beast speaks with the voice of the dragon, what sort of speech should we expect? Probably wise sounding, but deceitful, and leading toward death. This second beast directs the people in worship of the first beast. Let's see, where did we leave off? My official note taker. I believe we left off at... We finished chapter 13. Fantastic. All right. Oh, yeah. So we got to the number of the beast, right? And the number of the beast, as I mentioned before, is 666. What does that number represent? Well, if I am correct in what I've suggested to you earlier, that the number 7 represents like the holiness of God, the intersection of God and man, right? 6 would be falling short of 7, right? Probably a number that suggests something like sin, imperfection. I think it's somewhat telling for us that we often only think about half of this statement. The mark of the beast is the number 666 because it's the number of man. It's man's number. We tend to put a lot of heebie-jeebies on it, right? Because we think it's like the devil's number. Well, it's the number of a sinner, right? But what the beasts ask, what the beasts demand of people is that they put that on their forehead, put that on their hand. They identify themselves as that, right? And unless you identify yourself that way, you can't engage in commerce, you can't be part of polite society, which leads to persecution of the Christians. If you remember early on, that 144,000, well, they were sealed. They had a mark on their forehead. We're going to get back to that again here in just a little bit. I'm gonna sermonize briefly, and then we're gonna get into new verses. So one of the big moves that the church is struggling against lately, although maybe it's been an attack for longer than I'm aware, but one of the big things that I think the church struggles with these days in addressing sin is that there's a narrative that what you feel is who you are, right? What you desire is who you are. So your authentic self is whatever you want, whatever you feel, right? And what that leads to is people identifying themselves with their sin. And then if God condemns the sin, well, that's because he hates me, because that's who I am. See what I'm saying here? Right? That's a lie. It's a lie of the devil. He wants you to equate your sinful desires with your identity. Is that what's happening here? I don't know, but I can easily read it that way. That to have that mark, I identify myself as sinner. It's who I am, and we all just need to accept that about one another if we're going to have any kind of a society. That's perhaps one interpretation of what's happening here with these marks of the beast. Not everybody is marked, right? Who is not marked with the mark of the beast? Yeah. One of the ways it says it is those whose names are written in the book of life. Or you could just say, well, those who were already marked with a different kind of mark. Let's read chapter 14, starting at verse 1. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. How many blanks are there to be filled in right here? Can you have the mark of the beast and the name of God? That's a one or the other situation, right? Interestingly, and I know I've cautioned you against reading too chronologically here, but it does seem to be that they're sealed by God before being confronted with that mark. And the reason I highlight that is because we do understand that is an action of God. He seals us. It's not something that we, go in the bathroom mirror and apply to ourselves. Right? It's a gift that he gives to us. His righteousness, his salvation, his name he puts on us. Just as a point of review, why the forehead? Why is this where it's at? Yeah, it's a picture of your mind, right? Picture of your mind. Yeah, I guess that's right. It's a symbol for your mind. All your big thinking happens here. And also, back of the hand is mentioned elsewhere. Why back of the hand? Most of the things I do. Yeah, exactly. Most of the things I do with my hands, right? So it's both how I think and how I live, how I act. Couple things on this as well. And I don't know how much to put into this, but I think it is interesting. You either have the number of the beast or the name of God. There's something sterile and kind of yucky about being marked with a number, and something sort of warm and welcoming about being given a name, Verse 2. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like the harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. So, all right, obviously this is a picture of music from heaven, right? Peals of thunder, roar, many waters. Y'all, Brett can play louder on those drums. Yeah, maybe not ready for that. Yeah, it's a big, exuberant sound. But have you ever thought that maybe singing has symbolic value as well? I mean, do the saints around the throne literally sing? Probably. But here's what I think is fascinating. How many songs are being sung right now? Is everybody singing their own song? No, in the story here. Yeah, there's just one song. One song. 144,000 people all singing the same song. If you've ever been at a concert, like a big concert, big name band, everybody knows the songs, you get several thousand people singing together. It's really powerful, really moving. But part of what makes it so powerful, everybody's pointed the same direction. They're all on the same page. They're all focused the same way. There's a unity. Do they all sound the same? Does everybody in the crowd have the same voice? No. So there's an incredible plurality to it. But at the same time, it's being brought together harmoniously. Music also, there's, as far as I can tell, there's kind of two different kinds of art that you might be able to categorize art into two different buckets, right? On the one hand, there are things that are where time's not a factor. So if you walk up to a painting, for instance, it doesn't matter what time you encounter it, as long as you have light, it's the same painting. Sculptures, same way. And maybe the play of shadows throughout the day changes things, whatever. Sure, yeah. But that statue's there all day long. But music, dance, to some degree theater, it's momentary. And it's changing by the moment. And if you come in the middle of the song, well, you just missed the first half of it. You can't miss the first half of a statue, right? It's still there. You can always go back and look. So there's something also about this singing of all these people. They are moving together, right? They're all in sync. Another thing about singing, it's not just an instrumental, but they're singing. Any song that is sung, except some really weird, like experimental stuff maybe, there's words, and those words have a message. So it's not even just that they're having like a shared experience, like if they were all dancing together. That would be cool, but they're unified in not just their feelings, but in the message they're conveying as well. And this is an interesting song because it's a song that belongs solely to these 144,000. Nobody else can learn it. And on the one hand, you would think, yeah, so that excludes all the people who don't know God, all the people who are outside. It does, yeah. But it also seems to exclude like the four living creatures. They can't sing it. The angels, they can't sing it. It belongs only to those 144,000. You might wonder why that is. And I think it has to do with the fact that they've had an experience that nothing else in creation has had. To be a sinner redeemed. To be carried through the wilderness that is this life in a world broken by sin. I get asked sometimes, And maybe you have too. Why did God ever let Adam and Eve eat of that tree? He could have stopped them. Why was that tree even there? He could have stopped it. He didn't have to make that. If he's, an infinite, all-powerful God, right? The most honest answer I can give is I don't know. But if I were to take from what I know about myself and about humans generally, and when I think about the way that the end is described, the end is going to be a lot like the beginning. We haven't got there in the story yet, but hopefully you know. We believe in a resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. We don't think that forever with God is us as ghosts or angels. Forever with God, the way it's going to be, the thing that the saints under the throne are anxiously awaiting, is a resurrection with eternal bodies not plagued by sin, in a world not corrupted by sin. It's life as a whole person, body, mind, and spirit, in a paradise. Similar to how it all started. But will it be the same? Well, even if all of the setting is the same, I think the people will be different. Adam and Eve were deceived, I think, in part because they just didn't know what sin was like. They didn't know what death meant. You do. Could you ever imagine making the same choice they did, knowing what you know? So I do think there's a certain important quality, something that deepens our appreciation, something that gives us a song to sing, unlike what the angels will ever sing, about being sinners whom God loved and redeemed. Sinners who lived through all the pain and suffering that this life entails and are now experiencing the joys of all of that being behind us. I think that's a unique song that only God's people can sing. Maybe I've made too much about 3 verses, but I don't think so. All right, let's get on to verse 4. Still talking about the 144,000. It says, "These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as firstfruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless." All right. Right off the bat, there's a few things to pick at here. The 144,000 are virgins. Like they never had kids? Is that what we're saying? Like only those who were never married and then fully realized that marriage? No. But it's helpful to understand that throughout Scripture, repeatedly, idolatry is frequently equated with adultery. People worshiping idols are often talked about as prostituting themselves to those idols. I don't think this is talking about a literal abstinence from the marital union. I don't think it's that at all. But this is talking about the bride of Christ being kept pure for him. Right? It says that they did not defile themselves with women. Let me ask you, we're all grown-ups in here. Does God view sex as defilement? Not necessarily, right? I mean, he gave it to Adam and Eve as a gift before the fall into sin. He said, be fruitful and multiply before the fall into sin. So this isn't about that, right? This is about that spiritual cheating on God, giving yourself to somebody else. And that'll make more sense when we get a little bit later on. We're going to encounter Babylon the Great, and you'll go, oh, I see the metaphor now. But I just thought if we don't quite get there, I just want to make that, put that bug in your ear. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. It's like a reverse Mary had a little lamb, right? But actually, think about the words of Jesus. He says, my sheep know me, they know my voice, and they follow me, right? That's the way Jesus describes it. And of course, part of Jesus being the good shepherd is he became one of us. He became a lamb for us. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. Offered as first fruits. The idea, and this applies, I hope this applies to the way that you give to God in your own personal finances, right? The goal, the idea here is that the gifts we give to God aren't meant to be whatever we have left over at the end. They're meant to be from what we first receive, we first give to God. If you just give him what's left over, I'll be honest, you're usually not going to give him very good, and a lot of times you're not going to give him anything at all. There is always something to spend on, right? Now, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these people. But it's the same idea, right? It's like God didn't look at humanity and say, well, who's left? Either who survived through the struggle, who kept themselves pure. No, it's not about that. He's not like this. This isn't him choosing those who made it to the end. From before the creation of the world, he looked at all of mankind and said, you and 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 you, y'all are mine. And then as history plays out, he makes those things a reality by sending his son, by bringing you to the waters of baptism, by putting people in your life who share the gospel with you, by giving you the Holy Spirit to maintain you in the faith. Verse, no lie was found in their mouths, they are blameless. Again, is this saying that anybody who speaks a falsehood can never be counted amongst the 144? No, because remember, they became this multitude by having their robes washed clean, which means that probably their robes didn't start clean, right? They were washed in the blood of the Lamb. But what does this mean? I think it has a lot to do with their testimony to Christ, right? Push came to shove. Did they acknowledge Christ, or did they deny Christ? Did they receive the mark? Or was there something already there testifying to whom they belong? Do they belong to the beast, or do they belong to God? I don't know. Maybe we can get through a few more verses. All right, let's go with verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Let's just do all three angels, and then we'll go back and do some commentary. A second angel followed and said, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. and the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. Then I heard a loud voice from heaven say, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. All right, so we've got this threefold message. Would you say that the message is good news or bad news that these angels are delivering? Good news or bad news? Right. The answer is it depends. It depends. It depends on what gospel you cling to. It depends on what identity you claim. I think it's interesting. Our typical approach as Lutherans is to say law and then gospel. That's what we typically think. Realistically, it's an ongoing cycle of law and gospel, and which one is appropriate at that moment probably depends on the circumstances of the person you're speaking to. If you catch me at a funeral, I'm not going to preach a lot of law because there's law right there in the room with us. You can see death, right? If you catch me at a wedding, it's going to be a mixed bag. And on a typical Sunday, hopefully you're hearing both. Here, the first angel delivers the gospel. But along with that gospel is a call. I don't think you can separate the three angels into three separate messages, right? Not really. The first angel says, "Fear God and give him glory." The second one says, and again, is this good news or bad news? Fallen is Babylon the Great. Is it good news or bad news? Well, if you're the people of God, awaiting his vindication and an end to all of the problems that sin brings, it's good news. If you're Babylon, it's bad news. So it all depends on where you stand, right? And the third angel is a description of what happens to those who don't repent. And I know that in our humanness, a lot of us think that this all sounds pretty cruel, but you should understand that the point of sending the messengers is that people would heed the message. Right? Yeah. The point here is that God does not delight in anybody's suffering or going up in smoke. Everybody is being invited into the gospel. But God's also very honest with them about, and here's what happens if you don't heed the call. I have to do this as a parent, Hey, if you don't, then, right? I don't like having those conversations. I just want my kid to do the right thing because it's the right thing. But sometimes it helps to put a consequence in front of them or to just show what those consequences will be. If you don't do your homework, you're going to get a 0. And if you get a 0, it's going to affect your grade in a big way. Now, I'm not even making that happen. I'm just saying this is what will happen, right? Having that consequence in the front and center of your mind, sometimes we're motivated to do good because it's good. Sometimes we need the alternative motivation. And I think God loves you enough to present you with both. And that's what we get here. Let's do this verse 13 again here real quick. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. Coming up as a lifelong Lutheran, I often developed a knee-jerk reaction to the phrase good works. If I heard good works, I knew it was a trap. My teacher, my Sunday school teacher, maybe my pastor were trying to test to make sure I knew that you're not saved by your good works. Okay? So when I heard the word good works, or the phrase good works, I'd be like, ooh, no. Okay? That's overly simplistic, and it doesn't speak the way that the Bible speaks. The danger is the false gospel that if you do good, you will be repaid now. The message that the Bible gives us is when you do good, it's maybe even better if you don't get repaid now because your Heavenly Father sees it. And He will repay you. But not now. When Jesus talks about the Pharisees, he's like, they do this and they do that because they want the praise of men. I tell you, they have their reward in full, right? They're getting their repayment for their good deeds now. But rather, Jesus says, do these things such that only God sees, and then great will be your reward in heaven. Yeah? So, take heart, as you're struggling through life and as you're trying to do the good that Jesus calls you to do, and that good is not being met with good results, maybe, or gratitude, or whatever. It's okay. Take heart. God sees it, right? And those things that you did, Jesus says, when you did it for them, you did it for me. All right. We're going to call that good for today. Did we do the whole chapter? No, we got close. All right, so we'll pick up at verse 14 next week. Stick around. I've got church coming up in 7 minutes.